In this tutorial, I'm going to cover how to make a book nook. This is the first I've ever made, and hopefully this will just be the first of many. As Halloween is approaching, I thought I would do a Gothic study, and being a big fan of Poe, I decided I would do what I would imagine Poe's study would look like. I'll be walking you through all of the steps, and Alpha Stamps will be carrying many of the supplies that I used, almost everything, and there's a lot of new kits and image sets, so let's get started. The book nook is made out of a kit that's a box shaped like a book that's open, and the measurements of this one are 9 3/4 tall, 8 3/8 deep, and 4 3/4 wide. This is being carried by Alpha Stamps, and they have some smaller ones too. So if you decide that you do want to do a book nook, but if you don't want to do one as large as the one I did, there are other options. Now, when doing a project like this, it's a little bit different than other things in that you have to build it on each wall, do everything you want to do with each wall, which includes the paper, embellishments, furniture, all of that, and attach it to the walls, the floor, the ceiling first before you put all of the pieces together. So what I started with is the floor, and it doesn't really matter which of the walls or floor or ceiling you start with, but I started with the floor. And I'm using a paper pack called Ghost Stories, and there's actually two 12 by 12 paper packs that I'm using. One has designs on it, that's the one you see here, and the other one has very spooky Gothic images. And so I chose one of the papers, one of the darker papers, and I cut it into small strips. These are all 1/4 of an inch strips. I staggered the pieces so that it would look more like a laid hardwood floor. And one of the things to keep in mind as you're doing this, because all of these kits like this, they have tongue and groove, so they've got tabs that fit into slots. When you're attaching anything to the inside, something that's going to be on the inside of the box, you want to make sure that nothing covers the tabs that stick out. And when you're on the outside of the box, you want to make sure you do cover the tabs. Next, I decided what I was going to use for wallpaper on each of the walls. So that's each side wall and then the wall in the back. And the paper pack only has one of each 12 by 12 sheet. So I'm using a combination of papers to create the wallpaper. I've got a section on the bottom with one set of papers, one piece of 12 by 12, and I used another one for the top. And I think I made the top larger, so that's a 6-inch piece. And then the bottom, I believe, is a little less than a 4-inch piece. And one was big enough to cover both sides of the walls, and then I got a little a partial piece for the center. And I just used the leftover piece to do the back wall, because by the time I put everything on the back wall, you will never see that seam where I have spliced together the leftover pieces that I cut for each side. Next, I worked on the covers. And I'm using a product called Craft Text. I've used that before. It's like fabric, but it's paper, and it has a leather type look to it. I also apply something called Distress Crackle Paint, the clear rock candy, and that gives it a really fine crackle that I then go over with a distress pad. I think I use Vintage Photo, and I use the color based on which color paper I choose, and that makes it even look more like leather. And then I wanted to cut an opening, so I took a piece of paper and cut it the size of the opening that I wanted, and I used that by placing it onto the paper and marking where to cut out the hole. And then to border the hole, I've used the black Craft Text paper and created a border with that. Now, in terms of the images behind these, I wanted to use this one image that was in the 12 by 12 pack. It's got a poem by Edgar Allan Poe and the skulls. The problem was the scale was too big. But they also make rice paper, and it's smaller, so that was perfect.
although I did need to put a piece of white paper behind it because with the chipboard and the rice paper being like tissue paper, it would be too dark and you wouldn't see the image as well. So I wanted the image to be very, very clear. It's clear. It's kind of a fuzzy look anyway, but clearer. And then on the other side, I used a paper from the other Gothic Stories paper pack, the one that has all of the Gothic images. And I found one I liked that has tombstones and ravens flying around. And that's what I used for the front of the cover. You'll notice that I didn't cover the entire side. That's because I'm going to be doing a spine, and I will cover that when I get further down in the tutorial. Next, I worked on the ceiling, and I decided that I wanted a chandelier. And I'm using these tulip lights. I'm going to use 4 of them, and that can face up or down. Since it's a chandelier, I'm going to have it facing up. And I'm using a straw to be able to run the wires up through to the ceiling and out the back, which is where I'm going to run all of the wires for all of the lighting. And I need to poke holes in it to get the wires in. So I've made a mark with red ink to show where I need to poke the holes. And if you poke the holes with a pin and go all the way through the straw, then you'll have 2 holes that are exactly across from each other. And then do it on the other, going the other direction, and then you'll have the 4 holes. These wires are very, very thin, so you don't need a very big hole. And of course, you don't want to cut so much that the straw starts to collapse. And then just fish those wires up through the straw. Now, I also want to have a little decorative piece, so I'm going to use this little gold piece to put on the bottom, at the bottom of the chandelier, and I painted the straw black. Now, the length of the straw depends upon how far down you want your chandelier to hang. Now, unfortunately, I made mine too long, and I had to go back in and cut some of it away, which is not an easy thing to do. So I would be careful and just make sure that it's not too short and it's not too long. Next, I needed to punch a hole in the ceiling. And you can also see that I've covered the ceiling with the decorative paper, being careful not to cover the tabs since that's the inside. And then I have used some images from an architectural collage sheet to add ceiling medallions. I printed it twice and I backed it with chipboard, so I gave it some thickness and some dimension. And then I have a rondelle on top of that. Now, this is part of the reason why my straw ended up being too long, because I did not take that into account. But even if I had taken that into account, my straw was still too long. Anyway, so then I just fed the wires up through the ceiling, through the rondelle, through the ceiling medallions, which I also, of course, had to put a hole in so I could get all the way through. And then I used E6000 glue to glue the straw in place. You need something really strong. Super glue would work too, maybe really strong Gorilla Glue. And I glued that in place, and now you can see what that looks like with the chandelier in place. Next, I'm going to work on the wall on the left, which is going to have the bookcases and the fireplace. And here is a kit for the bookcase. It is sized to fit this these type of book nooks, and it's thinner than it would normally be. Not that you couldn't use this in some other project. You don't have to use this for a book nook. And if you look at the picture here, you've got a side piece, a back piece, a side piece, and a front. And then you've got some center pieces. The piece at the top is a lid, and then for some reason I didn't have it in the picture, but it has a bottom that's like that as well. And then you've got 2 frames. And the reason for this is that this allows you to add a light. The frame with the large hole allows you to put the light inside, and then the next one allows you to get the light through down to where all the books are, but so that the light will not fall through. And you can see here the kind of light that I'm using. And it doesn't have any wires. It's just got a little switch on it. It's already got its battery. So all you have to do is lift the lid, go inside, pull it out, turn it on, and put it back in and close the lid down. To go along with the bookcase, I have a collage sheet that will allow you to add all of the wood features to this, and you have pieces on this sheet to cover all of the surfaces that you would be able to see, plus some extra wood. And then you've also got some faux shelves. You kind of have 2 options with this project. You could just use faux shelves with items on them, glue those to the back of the bookcase, although I would recommend popping them out just a little bit to give it look more dimension and shadow. And I would use something like pop dots to do that. Or you could actually make a lot of little books and actually take some chipboard and make your own shelves. Now, one of the things you could use the extra paper for is to put a little bit of that paper on each shelf, at least the part that you can see. Now you have a couple of options. You can put faux images in there that are books or items that would sit on bookshelves, or you can actually put some books in the shelves. And you can cut your own books. I chose to make a lot of little books, so I have 2 new collage sheets along with the one that you can use to cover the bookcase with. One is some mini books that will fit in this nicely, and the other is a full sheet of faux books for faux shelves. Whatever way you go, just be sure that you do not put anything in there that goes all the way to the front of the bookcase if you're going to use a light. Because if you're using that light and if the stuff you're putting in there is too wide, then the light can't shine down in front of whatever it is that you put in the bookcase. In order to make it easy to lift the lid off of the bookcases to get to the light, because it's pretty tight in the book nook once you get it all put together, I have used these 2 urns. They're made out of wood. They're from my stash. I painted them and then covered them with some really thin gold tape and then some decorative fleur-de-lis on front, and that just gives me a nice little handle to lift to get into those lights. In between 2 of the bookcases is a fireplace and an overmantel. And again, these are kits, and they are scaled to work with the bookcases and also to work with the book nook. So that means that they are both very shallow. Just like with the bookcases, I have a collage sheet that gives you all the pieces that you need to cover both the bookcase, or the fireplace, and then the overmantel, as well as some extra items in there that you might want to use, and bricks, fire screens, that sort of thing. Now, here is the kit for the fireplace. You can see it's top, bottom, back, and an arched front. So the first thing I did was use the brick to cover the inside, and you don't have to cover the whole thing because you're not going to see all of it. And you'll notice that there's a hole in the back of this, and that is to accommodate a cord and a plug to glowing embers. Before putting on the arched front, I needed to put together another kit, which is a fire basket, and that's what the glowing embers are going to sit in. And again, this is sized to fit in this fireplace. And so here you can see the pieces I'm putting together. There's a back piece, and then there's a shelf piece. That's what the glowing embers are going to set on. And then you can see the hole that will match the hole in the back of the fireplace. And then you can see here I'm adding side pieces. And then finally I'm adding front pieces and a bottom. And then in the front of the fireplace are these grill pieces, and those just glue on top of the other pieces that I've already put together. And then to jazz it up, I have painted it black, and then I've added some Dresden to the back that's painted gold, and a piece of filigree that I bent on the front and painted that gold too. And then now you can see the embers sitting in there, and the cord is through the hole in the back. Now you can see where I have glued the fire basket inside the arched fireplace and glued the arched front on. And then I've inked all my edges, and I did this with the bookcases too. I inked all of the edges of just using a marker, of the kit, so that when I apply the images from the collage sheet, you don't see any white or any bit of the chipboard. And I also always take a marker to the edges of my images, particularly if it's things like this where I want to make sure that you don't see that white edge on the paper. So I use a marker on that first before I glue those in place. The overmantel is designed to fit with this. And by the way, you could use the fireplace and not the overmantel. And just like the bookcases, if you didn't want to do a book nook, you could use it in something else. And it's the same thing. It's a top, a bottom, sides, the arch in the front. And then what I did is I used this mirror film. This is the best I've ever seen. This stuff really looks like a mirror. and reflects like a mirror. And so I've put that in the back behind the arch so that I'd have that mirror. I just think it looks nice, and it will reflect the light of the moon that I will have on the other side of the window. And then once I got that put together, I covered that with the paper. And then to give it a lot more dimension, I printed this more than once. And I did this with the bookcases too. I just love layering the images. So every piece, the top of the bookcases, where it has all that decorative stuff, the decorative band between the fireplace and the overmantel, the arch of the overmantel, everything that's got some decorative piece, I print it, mount it on chipboard or heavy cardstock, and glue it on top. And so that just gives me a little bit of space, and it gives a little shadow and makes it look more dimensional. Once I had the two bookcases done and the fireplace and overmantel, then it was time to embellish everything. And you can also look at the wall. I have embellishments. I have up at the top, you'll see a painting of a ship, and there are paintings of women that are attached to the front of the whole piece of furniture. And there are collage sheets for those. There's a sheet, I used this one in the antique shop, the video before this, all kinds of paintings. I also have tin type photos that can be mounted. Then in addition to that, if you look at the very top of the overmantel, you see a plant. If you ever watched my Streets of Paris videos and I had a flower shop, I had this new sheet of flowers, or I'm sorry, of leaves. And if you cut those out and glue wire behind them, then you can bend them and make them look like realistic leaves. And those are all mounted in a little pot, and I have clay in there to hold the wire in place. And then in the front, you'll see there are a couple of maps that are rolled up and attached in place. And on the shelf of the overmantel in front of the mirror is a bust and two brass candlesticks. And then on, actually attached to the top of the fireplace there are two griffin sconces. They were silver and I painted them gold, and the candles in those are made from wax. Now working on the other wall, on the opposite side is a window. And if you watched my antique video before this, antique shop video before this is the same window that I used. It's a three-dimensional window, and it is designed to be able to put lights inside, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so you see here, it's a pretty simple kit. There's a back, front, and sides, and you'll notice the sides have holes, and those holes are to allow you to put the wire through those holes. Now, what I wanted to do was have a glowing moon. And the way I accomplished that is that I took one of the papers that had a moon on it from the Gothic Stories paper pack, and I cut out the moon. And then I printed a moon on vellum. Now you see 4 moons here because I couldn't decide exactly how dark the moon should be. I finally decided on the darkest one, which is on the far left. The other ones were just too light with the light behind it, so it was hard to tell that it was the moon. And I do have that dark moon image for you on my blog that you can download and use it if you would like to do the same thing that I've done. Now you can see that I've painted the front of the window. I actually changed the color. I ended up using a gold color. It was too much blue. So after I cut the hole that you see there, now I need to work on the lighting itself. Now I've put the kit together with everything except the front pane work. I've got the back and all the sides. And then which hole you decide to use really has to do with where you want to run this cord. Where is it going to go to? And in my case, it's running to the back of the book nook. So I've chosen a hole on the left side of the window. Now I wish I had chosen a hole on the bottom instead on the left side, but at the time I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to run the wire. If I was going to run it underneath the wallpaper, or I could run it on top of the wallpaper. So anyway, I ended up with the top. If I were you, and if you do it like I end up doing it, I would suggest using a hole on the bottom on the left. And then once I did that, I just put the fairy lights is what I'm using. I put the fairy light cord through. And then what I want to do is I just want the light to be right around the outside of the moon. I don't want it in the whole back of the window. So how I did that is I first drew I used the paper to create as a template and drew the moon now that it's got a hole there, so I could draw that. And then what I want to do is to take the fairy lights and wrap them around in a circle and make them slightly bigger than the hole. And then as you can see here, I've wrapped it around, I've clipped it with some clips just to keep it in place and make sure that it's going to fit. And then I glued it to the around the hole. Now you can see it's slightly larger than the actual hole that I've traced. So that means it's just going to end up on the very, very edge of the hole that I've cut for that moon. I glued the vellum moon behind the paper, then glued the paper behind the panes, and then glued the pane on top of the 3D box. And then here you can see I've turned the light on and you can see how it glows around the moon. To create curtains for the window, I am using another piece of the rice paper because it's very thin, so it's easy to fold and it's not too bulky. And so I cut a couple of pieces so that the paper would go from the top of the window down to the floor. So you have to figure out exactly where you're going to place your window on the wall. And then I accordion folded each piece and then I glued those to the window. I started by gluing some of the folds to the side and then gluing some of the folds to the top. And then on top of that, I added a window cornice, and I have a new sheet that has got all kinds of really beautiful window cornices on it. And just like I did with the bookcase and the fireplace, I printed this multiple times and cut out bits and pieces and layered them on top so it would look as thick as, I'm sorry, not as thick, but as detailed as possible. And I also put 3 little rondelles on the front there to add a little bit more dimension. And then if you look down, in order to kind of keep the curtains in place and all, I used 2 pieces of filigree, and then I also attached to that a little tassel. And so those are the little tiebacks for the curtains. Once again, I've used more of the paintings from the one painting collage sheet. And if you look at the tops of the walls, I am using some molding. And then at the break between the 2 different types of paper that I'm using, I also used a little chair railing. And just like with the crown or the medallion for the lights, that comes from the same architectural kit that includes all that kinds of molding and stuff like that. And those were a really good match for the color scheme. Now, if you notice the wire that's coming out from the curtain, I only had to tack it down, the top part down behind the curtain, because once I put the walls in place just to get a sense of where things were going to be and what could you see and what could you not see, I realized that you would not even be able to see the bottom of that cord. So I didn't have to worry about tacking that down or doing anything like that because it would never show based on all the other furniture that's in the way that blocks it. The last thing I want to bring to your attention is if you look to the left, you see some light up by the cornice. The reason being I needed enough cord to get it out the back of the book nook. So that meant that I could not use all of the fairy lights in the circle that I made around the moon. So one of them ended up on the outside of the window. I initially thought that I would put electrical tape over it to block the light, but once I held the book nook together before I glued everything in place, I noticed that you really couldn't see that's where it was coming from, and it actually gave me some more light in the back of the book nook, so I just left it like it was. The first thing I do with the back wall after I put the wallpaper on is I need to create notches to accommodate the cords that are coming from the side walls. I have 2. I've got one coming from the fireplace, the glowing embers, and I have one coming from the fairy lights that are the glowing moon. To do that, I laid all 3 pieces next to each other with the sides on each side of the back piece, and then I laid the cord out and marked the place to add a notch. Now, where you want to add the notch is whatever is the shortest distance from wherever the light is to getting it out the back, and you need to put it below or above a tab. So you can see here I have marked one, the one that's going to be the glowing embers, I've marked a place to make a notch, and I've done it before the tab that's on the back piece. Now I just repeat that for the other side. Again, I make another notch to accommodate the wire for the fairy lights. Now that I've got that notch in place, I've got a place to stick those cords in when I end up gluing all of the walls together. Now the back wall is also going to have lighting. And at the top of this, the first thing I did was glue this Gothic arch, and I'm going to be putting another one on the front, and that just gives it some really cool architecture. And then I'm using these two lights. These were the simplest ones because all I had to do was poke a hole and stick the wires through to the other side. And they were black, so I also painted them gold before I put them up there. Now here you can see the back side. This was one of the lights that I used that did not come with its own power supply. So I had to actually add this little coin battery to the wires. Those were raw wires, and all you do is twist the wires together. There's a black wire coming out of the coin battery and a red one, and then you've got blue and red wires coming out of both of the lights. So I just put the two blue together and put the two red together and then twisted them on the two wires coming out of the coin battery, and then I used some electrical tape to go around that. And then I've just taped this down on the back so that way it doesn't flop around, and it will make it tighter for when I put the back on it to cover it up. The main piece on the back wall is a secretary. And again, it's a kit, and it's actually two pieces. Again, these are sized to work with this book nook so that it all fits with the other pieces. I thought I would walk you through this kit because it has a lot of pieces and it can be confusing about what goes where. So if you look at number one, we've got the big back piece, and we've got two side pieces that go on the back piece. Then you see there is a bottom piece with two side pieces on that. And so I've laid them out in the way that they will glue. Of course, they won't glue them flat. You'll put them up and then glue them in place. And then number two, you've got this little cross section. These pieces slip into each other. And so you need to put that in place before you put the sides up and the bottom up. So if you look at number three, you look at the top, I have inserted that in the top there. And then I've also inserted the two shelves, which those are separate pieces. And now you can move to putting the rest of the pieces in. In this image, you can now see that I've glued the sides up that are at the top, the sides up that are at the bottom, and then the big bottom piece. And then, of course, in the middle is the piece that's slotted together. And then if you look on the side, this is a side view of that piece. And then next you will want to put in the top pieces, number two. So there's little pieces that go in the very top that give you top shelves. And then there are three pieces there at the bottom that slot into those other slots, and that's going to give you all the dividers for your little nooks and crannies and your drawers. And then you can see what the completed hutch looks like. And then below it is our three drawers. You just fold those along the lines and glue them. And those will fit into the three larger slots, and the others are just open slots for whatever you want to use them for. The base is just a box, and it's got four sides, a front, and then the back is open. Before I combined the top and the bottom, other than adding the paper, which I'll cover that in a second, because Poe's a writer and I want this to look more like a secretary, he needed a desk. And so I cut a piece of chipboard, and you can see here the finished piece with the extra chipboard there, and it's sandwiched between the base and the top. And you'll notice there is one side of it is much shallower than the other side. And the reason being is that if you look at the wall with the bookcases and the fireplace, you'll notice that I've glued it starting at the very front of the book nook. And if you look all the way to the right, there wasn't enough room left on that side of the wall for me to have a full desk. So the way I got around that and to still give it some kind of a desk is I made part of the desk much shallower than the other part. And so I created a template, and this template, the shallow part is 1 7/8 inch deep, and then the deeper part is 2 7/8 inches deep. And that gave me enough desk area that I could put all kinds of desk accessories. Now, I'll have this template for you on my blog if you want to use the same measurements as I did, but I would always caution that you check all of this. The last thing you want to do is put everything together, glue everything together, and then find out that it's off based on how you're doing it. So just be sure that you check the dimensions before you put the whole thing together. And what I did for cutting that out, I used chipboard, layers of chipboard, until I got it the same thickness as all the other chipboard that is used in the hutch. Now, in terms of covering everything and making it look like wood, just like the other pieces of furniture, again, I have another collage sheet, and it has all the pieces to cover everything, as well as a big piece of wood, extra wood for whatever. And in my case, I used it to cover that desk area that I created. And it's also got a lot of extra trim pieces, because even once you cover the surface, then you've got a lot of edges in between all the little nooks and crannies that you need to cover. So there's plenty of trim pieces in there for you to do that. And then there's just an extra in there, a desk pad. So this is what the completed wall looks like. If you look at the top, I've used another one of the tintype photos at the very top. And then moving down, you see a plant and another pot. The books are held with Shakespeare bookends. And I used a lot of cast metal pieces. They're just silver, and you paint them however you want. So these pieces were painted with gold and left some of the silver and then black bases. Then the little bust that you see, that was also silver cast metal. Then moving down to the very top shelf inside the secretary, you'll see rolled up pieces of paper, and you'll see a picture, another cast metal, and then some teeny frames that I used teeny tintype photos. So there's a new collage sheet for that, and there's also a new collage sheet for all kinds of old writing and correspondence and manuscripts. And then also I gave you some blank pages. And then you see a clock. That was another one of those metal pieces that I painted black and gold. And then next to that is another urn. That's how it came. And another little tiny frame with the tintype photo in it. And then keys hanging there. And then if you move back down to the right, you see a hourglass. Now the hourglass is made from 2 bead caps. One is the base, one is the top. Then there is a bead in between that has a hole, and then the 2 glass, those are just 2 glass containers. They're open on the top and the bottom. And then I use 2 handles on the side. And so all those pieces, Alpha Stamps has all those if you want to make your own hourglass. And then that's just a box with a lid. I left it exactly the way it was. And then another one of those metal, cast metal pieces is the ship. And again, that was silver. And of course, you see a lot of other books and whatnot. And then a spyglass. That's the way it comes. And another one of the little tintype photos. And then if you look down into the cubbies and the drawers, you'll see on the right, you'll see a stack of envelopes. So I have a free collage sheet for you that is nothing but envelopes, all vintage envelopes, and they come in 3 different sizes. So you've got a lot of variety depending on the size of your project. And then if you go all the way to the other side, the little cubby has the blank pages that are on the correspondence sheet. And then keep going down, you'll see a little cup, a little teacup. And then you will see a letter holder. Now that is just a piece of filigree that I have bent so that it would sit flat, and then you could put all the different pieces. I've got postcards and all kinds of stuff in there. And then if you move over further, then you have a desk set. I figured a writer has to have a desk set. And underneath that desk set is, again, envelope, more correspondence. To construct the desk set, I started with a little box. It's just a kit. It's actually a kit of 3 different sized boxes, and this is the medium size. It's easy just to fold these and glue them together. And to give it a leather look, I covered it with the Craftex paper, and I did the same technique as I did on the covers with the Rock Candy Crackle paint. And then I used 4 little bead caps as feet, and then you see the little handle in the middle. I looked at a lot of Victorian desk sets, and one of the things many of them had, when it was something like this where there was a drawer, or even if it was just on a tray with feet, is it had some kind of a back or bracket around it. And so what I've done is I've used a piece of filigree, and I've bent it to just create this back that's completely across the back and then a little bit on the sides. And then for the desk accessories themselves, if you start in the front on the right, you can see a magnifying glass that comes that way. And then next to that's a letter opener. It actually can be a dagger or a letter opener. And again, it's that same kind of cast metal. So I painted the handle black, and then I put some flat back beads on that. And then next to that is an ink blotter. And the handle on top of that is actually a doorknob. It's a cast metal doorknob. And then underneath that, I've used more of the Craft Tex paper. It's the white, and I've just cut a little strip and wrapped it, or put it together, overlapped it, and glued it together. And I thought that really looked a lot like what a real ink blotter looks like. And in the back, you have 2 ink wells. Now those are just clear glass bottles with an opening, and I used alcohol inks to make it look like real ink. And in the bottle on the left is the navy blue ink, and then on the right is the black ink. And then I put these really pretty thin filigree pieces on the front to decorate those, and then the little caps on the tops on the top. And in the center is the container with the powder that you would shake to put on the paper, and then you'd blot it all with the ink pad. The last piece that completes the desk set is the ink well. So you have the 2 bottles of ink, but then I have an ink well, and that is made from a rondelle, the same rondelle I used on the chandelier, a round bead, also the same round bead at the bottom of the chandelier, and another one of those tops like I used on the 2 bottles of ink. And then I have a feather in there as a quill. A last minute addition to the secretary is a photo album, and the album insides are a little kit, and I have used that new collage sheet of the tiny tintype photos to put those in the album. And then that collage sheet also comes with album covers, and so I've used one of those covers on the front, and then again I've used a little piece of filigree that I've bent to use that as the clasp to keep it closed. I at one point thought about putting it on the fireplace mantle or the overmantle, but I ended up getting other things, and so I still made it, and instead I put it on the desk. There are a few freestanding items, and those are the chair and the table. Now the chair, I made that from bits and pieces. The back is a Gothic window. The base is a chipboard kit to make a camp chair. And then the arms are just scroll brackets that I've glued upside down. And then for the seat, in order to make it cushy, I used a piece of chipboard that I cut slightly smaller than the seat. And then I attached cotton to that. I just tore up some cotton balls. And then I had some leftover rice paper from the curtains. So I used a piece of that and put that on top and glued it underneath. And that's what made my cushion. And then to the front, just to dress it up a little bit more, I added some small tassels. They're the same kind of tassels that are on the curtains. They're just much, much smaller. And then the table, it is a kit. Very easy to break it apart and glue it together. Now the top, I ended up using some filigree around, or not filigree, some lace around it from my stash just to dress it up some. And then the tray that's on top of it is actually a picture frame. And then you see a small picture frame, and then I have one of those small tintype photos in that, some of correspondence, and then you see a brandy decanter and a glass. Now also on the floor you see some books. In the back there's a stack of books with a skull on it, and towards the front there's a stack of books with some candlesticks on it. And then there's also a rug on the floor. I have that image for you as a free one for you to download. Now returning for the final step, which is to, once you have all your pieces done, all your walls done, any extra stuff that you want to put in that's not attached to a wall, now it's time to start gluing the walls to the floor and the ceiling to the walls. And of course, as you're doing that, first you want to glue any freestanding things onto the floor before you enclose it, and it gets really difficult to get inside the book nook. And then the next thing is to work on the back of the book, the spine. And this is what's going to cover up all the lights. Now, if you don't have lights, then you don't have to go through all this. You could just cover it however you want. And so since this is going to depend upon what kind of lighting you have and how many and how much space it takes up in the back, the measurement will depend upon what you're doing. So you want to cut a piece of the Craft Tech paper big enough that it will go all the way from the one cover, for me, the part I left open, all the way around all of the stuff in the back. And you want the back to be pressed up against the back of the book as much as possible. And you may even be able to attach some of that to the back of the book, and then all the way around to the other side of the cover. And so that will be the size of the piece that you need. And for me, what I did is I used the same technique I did on the cover. I used the rock candy crackle paint to create the same kind of texture. And then I rubbed, since it's black, I rubbed over it with the distressed ink pad, the black one. And then now I needed to come up with a closure. So I will glue the spine paper on one side, and then now I need to come up with some way to attach it to the other side where I can open it up whenever I need to. And the way I'm doing that is with miniature little tiny magnets, a row of very, very tiny magnets. And I'll leave a link for you in the description of this video with the link of where I purchased these. They're very, very tiny and they're very thin. And so that side of the spine is going to be lifted just a little bit off the front of the cover, but just barely. And so I did a row of those, and I will tell you, these little magnets, boy, they are strong. I was surprised. So I couldn't just glue them one after another. I had to glue one and then skip a couple, then glue another, then skip a couple, because as soon as I put them down on top of the glue and I used glossy accents, the magnet next to it would pull it over. So I had to space them out and then let them dry and then do more and fill in as I go. Once I did that, now I've got to figure out on the other side, on the cover paper itself, I need to also have the other side of the magnet. And one of the things to remember is magnets have positive and negative sides. You can't have two negative sides together or two positive sides, or they won't stick to each other. So you do need to make sure, and I made a mistake with a couple of these where I didn't get a negative and a positive on each side. I got the same, so I had to redo those. The way I came up with doing it is, in order to know where to place them on the other side, on the actual paper cover, is I put a little dot of red paint on each one of the magnets, and then I folded the cover for the spine over and just very carefully pressed it into place so that those red dots would transfer to the paper that's the cover. And then I really quickly went in with some Windex and wiped all that paint off, because I didn't want there to be anything that would get in the way of the magnets attaching to each other. And then you can see here where I've got all the little red dots that were transferred from the other magnets. And now I know where to stick the magnets that are going to go on the back cover. Now, if you want to have a nice looking top to your book, you need an image that looks like pages. So I have come up with this image, and this is for you for free on my blog with the other stuff. And the piece is big enough to cover this particular book nook. And of course, if you do a smaller one, it would definitely fit that. It's slightly wider than the top of this book nook, so you might need to just trim it down a little bit. But one of the things you need to do is, once you get your magnets in place and now you can close that spine up, you need to print this and flip it over so that you're on the white side, and set that down on your paper. And so you want to trace the curve of your spine onto this paper. And once you do that, then you can glue that, flip it over, glue it on the top of your book, and then you will use that curve to go in and snip little pieces of the paper after that curve so that you can bend that down. And that way, when you bend that down and your paper for your spine is around it, then it fills it in perfectly. So you've got a perfect arch that fits your particular spine curve. One last touch that I added that I thought made it look even more like a book is I cut very thin strips of the black craft tech paper, and I glued them to the top on each side of the book page image, and then I also glued them down the front of the opening of the book nook. And then, of course, after all that was done, then I put the final Gothic arch on the front of the book. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and I've given you some inspiration whether or not you want to make a book nook. As usual, down in the description is a link to my blog where you will find information on all of the supplies I use, links to Alpha Stamps, who carries this, and information on the new collage sheets, and also lots more pictures.